but it's been actually perfect. It's been in the 80s. Hadn't had hardly any rain. I mean, it's nice out. It's
I got to
good.
say, I'm a little jealous. We're supposed to get like 3 inches of snow tonight.
Oh my gosh.
You
want we had a 15-minute blizzard today.
What?
Where literally it was just a whiteout for 15 minutes, and then the sun came out and everything melted. It was super, super weird.
Yep.
So
I need a haircut. What do you do with haircuts at times like this, Tony? What do you do? You look like the guy who does it himself.
I was at my neighbor's and I was looking through their cupboard for one of their razors, and I almost ordered one of those old Flobies off of Amazon the other day.
You should do that. What's stopping you?
Why would we not do a live podcast of me using a Flobie?
Why didn't you do it?
That'd be great. Well, hey everyone, welcome down to today's live. We've got a special guest on today, Tony Ruggiero. Tony, for folks that don't know you, what do you do? What players do you work with? Give us a little background.
Oh, I just teach golf, just like Nick. I don't spend much time on the PGA Tour, but last year I spent 28 weeks. I teach guys like Lucas Glover, Robbie Shelton, Bill Haas, Zach Suker. Teach Andy Ogletree, won the U.S. Amateur, who was hoping to be at Augusta this week and turn pros not soon after that. But so just teach a bunch of guys that are decent players, and we have some fun. We have a good group, and so I teach here in Mobile and at Frederica Golf Club in Sea Island or over at St. Simons, Georgia. So just hanging out. It's good to have it. Nick, I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. No, those are big-time players right there, Tony. That's quite a resume.
Well, I'm waiting to get fired. I keep checking my phone, make sure anybody hadn't texted me yet today. But got some good guys on the web too. Luke Guthrie, who played on tour, and Rick Lamb, who played on tour. We started working the end of the year. So, I've got a policy of no jerks. I'm going to try to.
Good rule.
Yeah. So anyways, I've got a good group of guys. Smiley Kaufman and I are working together again. So we talked about him a little off air. So fun. I enjoy the projects, and I enjoy trying to get people back to playing good. And it's interesting.
I think a lot of people wonder how you meet people like that. How'd you get involved with these guys? Is it word of mouth like most of my relationships are, or is it friends of friends?
I think it is now. It's interesting. The folks I get now are different than the folks I started with. Like, I was very fortunate. I taught Robbie Shelton since he was a freshman in high school, and Bobby Wyatt, who played for a while and was an All-American and played on the Walker Cup. I taught him from when he was in 8th grade, 9th grade. So as those guys came up, and then I taught Smiley Kaufman at the end of his college, and obviously had a great run. And through those guys' success and people you meet, I got introduced to other folks, and I taught Zach Suker because of those guys, and since he was just out of college, and then introduced to Lucas Glover, and Lucas and I've had a good 3.5, 4 years, whatever it is, working together. And from Lucas came Bill and different things. So, how it is. It's like you just got to get your foot in the door. But when you get an opportunity, you got to do a decent job at what you're doing, right? And I think it's having the right information for the right guy at the right time. And if you get lucky with that, you get some opportunities.
Yep. No, I think that's awesome.
What are some of the keys, Tony, to developing some of those players like Robbie and Bobby, that kind of kickstarted that? Like, what were some of the keys to helping them make that jump along the way and get them to such a high level?
Well, one, they were way more talented than their teacher. And I tried, but I couldn't screw them up. But, I've always been very, Nick, we were talking about this, like my philosophy hasn't changed in 20 years, 19 years. And, maybe my understanding of some of the stuff that I do is certainly a lot better. And I've refined some things, but like I've always been really big on making guys pay attention to details. Really hammered into them the importance of the setup to match the shot shape they're trying to hit, and develop solid fundamentals, and then helping coach them to have a good complete game, I think is important, not just golf swing stuff. So obviously their talent was the most important thing, but I think one thing, if you look at all of the guys I've taught that have come up, they all have really good fundamentals. I mean, nobody has and I know there people are going to go, oh, well, this guy has a face that looks like this and he can still play. But like, for the most part, these people I've developed from young have good club faces, not crazy swing pass, and they have really good pivot motions. They can wind up and unwind and use the ground a little bit. And I've always thought that if from a young player, if you can teach them to have a good club face, good setup, really learn to develop a pivot early on, so that as they grow into it and they come in contact with all these great fitness people that are out there and all this information, then when they learn more and they've already got a pivot going, they're way further ahead than folks that try to figure it out later on.
Yep. You said something interesting in there, which was that your swing system, to say it pretty simple, hasn't changed a whole lot. I think that's a really good point, an interesting one too. I think it's easy to change your system very quickly these days with information flying at you so fast. But that's usually a sign that you didn't really know what you were doing in the first place when it radically changes. So that's pretty cool to hear that yours hasn't changed a ton. But you did mention in there what the same way that I feel, which is the way I describe things or my understanding of the nuances has probably changed and progressed over time. But it didn't change to the point where 10 or 20 years ago, I didn't know what I was doing either.
Right. No, agree.
You bring up a good point there. It's so pop right now to say, and I just learned this brand new thing and start teaching a lot of people something radically different. But that's.
I think if your goal is to make a player better, right, and you start out, like I was lucky, I was mentored by great teachers, and these great teachers hammered me with the importance of fundamentals and different things. And as I've gone along, I've tried to learn more about that and how to measure it. But if your goal is to make the player better, and it's not to be Insta famous or Twitter famous or get the most followers, I think in the end, you'll stay more committed to the things that work. Yep. If you're just trying to be a soundbite, then I think you're more apt to jump around.
Yeah, and that's a tough game to play. You've got different avenues now. When maybe 20 years ago when you were a PGA Tour teacher, you had one. It was really, did all your players get better? Now you got, do you teach good players? Do you teach juniors who are good and playing well? Can you get online and build a social media presence? And that is almost like the easiest one to do right now.
Sure.
And a lot of people are doing that, not necessarily with the foundation of really being great teachers. They just have built this persona online. So that's why it's fun to talk about you, because I know you don't really care about anything online.
I mean, more than I used to, I guess. But I'm, but I have put a 3 wine glass limit on. When I've had more than that, they take the phone away from me, and I'm not allowed to answer comments and stuff. Because Nick, you and I mean,
I think we've broken that rule a few times.
We have at the PGA show with our good friend Matt. But I always use, and I had a parent ask me about this within a week or two, because all of this stuff's flooding the social media now. And they asked me about somebody, and I said, like, my general rule and test is, I mean, the guy ought to be able, or lady ought to be able to give you one person at one time who's actually really good that they've made good.
Yeah.
If the person can't do that, then I don't know that I'd spend a whole lot listening to them, no matter how cool the graphics are and all of that stuff. And I think length of time with the students. A lot of guys have gotten lots of shots and lots of opportunities to coach a bunch of great players, but it's not lasted and not long. I mean, I think proving your worth, part of it is being able to longevity with a player.
Yep, I think that's great. Cordie, should we look at this conversation we had with Brad?
Yeah, let's pivot over and talk a little bit about the pivot.
Good segue, Cordie.
Was that good?
You've been
I've been working on. I've been saving that here.
Like I'm watching The Price is Right or something. That was Bob.
So yeah, this is actually kind of cool. Nick, you had this conversation with Brad Faxon, and as a part of that, he was asking a question about his golf swing, and I thought, like, what a cool way to talk about this than have Tony on and you to kind of discuss a couple of swings that he made, which are different because they have two different thoughts behind them. Brad was talking about the one method that he was trying, where he's trying to stay restricted in his pivot back with his hips and have more, like X factor or coil, and then another which is a bit more unrestricted, right?
Yeah. So Brad started playing golf as a kid, and he didn't really hook the ball like he does now, and did through his whole career. Then through lessons and instruction for 15 or 20 years, his tone started to change on how he swung. And he asked a question. I see all the great players of yesteryear who turned their hips a lot more, from Bobby Jones to Byron Nelson to Sam Snead, turn their hips a lot, straighten their right leg in the backswing or their trail leg, and flex their left knee or their lead knee quite a bit. And he asked, should he do that? So we had a little talk about that in his garage, which we'll show some bits and pieces of here and then on YouTube as well. But here's the context of it. We're going to look at a short clip with Brad here, but on the left-hand side, you can see that's one of his first swings. Usually we practice a few times a year. That's about it. And he's not real serious about playing the most competitive golf and the best he can anymore. He's far more interested in the many other ventures he's got, but he still loves to talk about golf. So for me, I just talk about golf with him whenever he wants. I know he's not going to necessarily diligently practice everything that we're doing. And who knows, the next time the phone rings, he's been known to ask the next person a question. That's just how he is. That's what he likes to do. So swing on the left was the first one that we did for the day. And he talked to me a little bit about how he's not hitting the ball very high. They're not going very far. And he asked, how do I hit it higher and farther? So here's a little touch of our conversation, and then we can wrap up, summarize that. So swing on the left, because of the limiting amount that you're turning your hips and your shoulders at this point, to make your swing long enough, you start pulling your arms apart, and then the shaft starts to move to the right. This swing, this is really the top of the swing that you made here. You kept turning as long as you could, which was really the part we were practicing there. And then there's the top of the swing. Where this becomes interesting relative to your earlier comments is on the downswing. So when your left humerus is parallel to the ground there, how the shaft passes through the top of your shoulder as opposed to a little bit below it, like you see in this one. So at this point in time, you have the face more open in this swing. You have the face more closed here. You have your left arm further behind you. The shaft is passing below your shoulder. This is a swing direction and a club face angle relative to the path that at this point in time helps you hit little draws. This one with the shaft too high, going through the top of your shoulder and the club face more open than this swing, so you can see much less of it. At this point in time, you're ready to slice. So you need to accommodate that somehow. And the way that you do that was to stop turning, raise the shaft up. And by the time the club head's going to be a couple frames from the ball in here, you can see a difference in the angle of approach between that one, and I'll try to move the here. So, Tony, I'm interested in your opinion, but this is what I see a lot of people do in general. Mm-hmm. On the backswing, they don't turn enough with their pelvis, and that includes straightening your leg, which was really Brad's question. Should I do that more? Should I play like those guys, or should I keep my knee flex almost the same? If you don't turn enough in the backswing, like I'm sitting in this chair that can move, if I stop moving it, I can't really move my arm too much further. So the way I accommodate that is do what Brad does. Pull your arms apart, start raising them over your head. That way you've got some more range of motion. You can make the swing longer. Where that starts to become a problem is on the downswing. The higher you start raising your arm up, you potentially have a problem like what Brad does, where the shaft and the club head start to enter his body from that side view camera we just looked at too high, like way up here by his neck, as opposed to just lower and closer to the middle of your bicep. So that's where I see so many tour players go wrong. They don't have enough of the pelvis turn in the backswing. They raise their arms up too high, then have the shaft come down too high, and then start doing some non-PGA Tour-like things to lower their swing direction and ultimately flatten out the shaft. That seemed like something reasonable to you?
Yeah, I think that the one with the hybrid was a home run. I mean, that swing looked awesome, right? And I think that any golfer listening to this, you have all that data I know in your system, but I would bet that a large portion of positions at the top that aren't desirable or very good are caused in some form or fashion by not enough pivot or rotation going back. And most people have to turn their hips or straighten their leg to allow it to happen. And so, yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. And what would be interesting to me is you didn't have a face on view, but, when you ran it halfway down and the difference of where the shaft was, I would guarantee you that it looked like it was narrowing a lot on the one on the left. Also, the good video looked to me like you would see more space and more width coming down. Looked like everything was stretched out, way more structure. Looked better all the way around.
He's a unique case where most people on the most amateurs on the downswing don't have enough of the radial deviation or the wrist cock on the way down, so they're more susceptible to not having enough when they hit. But Brad and a lot of players who do overdraw tend to have too much of the wrist cock where the shaft's almost hitting them in the shoulder. Think of like Phil Mickelson. So most of the time we're practicing, don't feel like you do that at all throughout the whole swing. So it's a different pill depending on who the person is, for sure.
Right. Absolutely, but it looked good. And again, we talked about different ways we describe things. I call it that structured look at the top that he had in the good video, the one that was on the right. The club face was square, but there looked to be structure, and the arms and the club matched how much he turned with his body going back. I don't prefer, obviously there's guys that do it great both ways, but I love to see a guy's club and his arms move in unison with the turn of his body and not a lot of excess motion when that stops. And so, it was awesome. Probably, and we talked about this all there, I would bet that swing mechanically and fundamentally might be better than some of the swings he made even when he played his best, because he was just a healthy putter and chipper, right?
Yeah. He'll tell you most of his game was controlling his low pull draw off the tee and with all of his long clubs, but he was so good around the greens that he could make up for it in that regard. But he was never really able to hit a high push draw like he can. I've seen him do it hundreds or thousands of times. He can do that. So if he could have hit the ball higher, farther, and had some command over how to eliminate the pull draw that he has learned over time now, he would have won 10 times as much as he did now. Now, earlier, you mentioned something interesting, though, because we do measure every single person that comes into Golf Tech. Not right now because there aren't any, but there will be again here very soon. One of the biggest separators to drawing is how much your shoulders are turned when the shaft is parallel to the ground in the backswing. Okay. So that early in the backswing, the best players that we've measured are turned 53 degrees with their thorax or the top of their shoulders. The worst ones tend to turn the least at the time when the shaft's parallel to the ground. So in context, if you want to draw, a good way to do that is turn yourself a lot when the shaft's parallel to the ground. Players who are the worst and the ones who slice the most barely turn themselves at all when the shaft's parallel to the ground. So a way to start doing that more is follow that advice that Brad was getting, which was straighten your right leg some more. Try to take your pelvis and move it a lot. Most people don't know that from address until the shaft's parallel to the ground, you move your shoulders close to the target 60 degrees in that small amount of time. Mm-hmm. And the worst ones move maybe half of that at the most. And it's really hard to overcome that.
And this is the same conversation, just said a different way from a tour player's perspective, if you will. So at the Players' Championship that was only one day, Lucas Glover and I were working on the range on Wednesday, and he was having a hard time getting the ball started to the right. And, I was trying to get him to turn his chest, his trunk, rib cage back more to do that. And I would tell him that he'd hit some good, some bad, but he couldn't, anyways, his feeling for it was, he was like, video this. And I was like, well, what are you doing? And he's like, no, I'll tell you afterwards. I just want to see what you think. So I videoed it, and the thing's perfect, right? The arm didn't lift, left arm's flatter, hits perfect flat draw. And he's like, well, I just feel like I keep my elbow tucked under on my rib cage longer on the takeaway. So it's interesting, like, as teachers, we're trying to get guys to do the stuff we can measure. But one of the cool things is players figure out a way to do things that makes sense and feels good to them. Yep. And, that was a cool teacher moment for me. I was like, hell, why didn't I think of that? But that's why they're great players. They take information, and I think all great players take information people like you or I give them, and they take the parts out of that they need and for what they're going to do.
And then I probably, like you, over time have gone from, if you want to explain the whole thing, we can talk about how to do the shaft from address till it's parallel to the ground for probably an hour conversation. That's just boring and unnecessary, though. So usually my instruction is on the backswing, try to take the butt end of the club and rub it up against your thigh on the way back, just as a way to make somebody move so that they've got to move the shaft more inward early on. That's how you can distill complicated things down to something that's simple or easy. That's pretty interesting, though, that he just really talked about how to turn your shoulder more this way and keep his elbow really close.
He tries to keep that right elbow tucked on his rib cage, and it makes him turn more back because he's like, the only way I'm going to get my arm and the club back to where I want it to go is to turn.
Yeah,
you know,
I think that's great.
Yeah,
and that's awesome. You've got some great players that really have some small, delicate feels that they just hang on to, and they're able to change where the ball goes very quickly with just a little tapping of that feel that they have.
Absolutely. And I think, but that's one of the cool things about talking to other teachers is we all have experiences with guys that are great players. And like, you know, I may hear that thing you just said about how much the trunk turns, shoulders turn. Like that may make sense to a guy like a Bill Haas, but it wouldn't make sense to Lucas Glover, right? And so, and I may say something to you that you use down the road with a player. And I think that's the beauty of what we do. I'm not in the business of trying to pee on somebody's leg and prove I'm any better than anybody else. And if I can find something out from talking to you or anybody, I mean, that I can help my player with, I'm going to do it.
That's awesome. So Brad's question was really, should you change your knee flex? It should feel like you're riding a bike with straightening and flexing your knees on the backswing. That's how you make yourself more mobile. Pretty simple answer.
Absolutely. Just do that.
Nick, what do you think about in the Brad Faxon videos we were watching? Could mobility issues be a factor at all in that change over the years as time has gone on, or is that not relevant in this case?
Yeah, well, I would probably say that almost anyone that I've ever met, I can't think of one person who can't turn their shoulders 90 degrees in the backswing. Zero. So I don't think any of this is flexibility. I think it's understanding how to use the mobility that you have. If I wanted to design a swing where no one could do it, no one could turn enough, then the way I would do it is keep both of your knees flexed in the backswing, exactly like they were at address. No one would be flexible enough to play the game then. So, I mean, to answer your question, I don't think golf in general is a flexibility, mobility limitation problem that golfers have. They have a motor program in their head, that's their swing, that is flawed in some ways, that can ultimately make people inflexible. So if you're trying to make backswing and you want to keep your trail knee bent the whole time, you're setting yourself up to have a whole host of golfers that are very inflexible. If you're trying to encourage people that need that advice to straighten their right leg in the backswing to some degree, you probably don't have a lot of inflexible people. So I hope that, I want that to come across right, but your system to teach has to be flexible enough to help someone over here and this person, not just force them into one mold.
When we started this, you know, and I gave a little intro and you talked, I haven't said it, my stuff hadn't changed. One of the things that had become refined is, you know, I learned under great teachers, but you know, my early years, it was a lower body that was pretty quiet, didn't move up. And the thought of the pivot was entirely winding this up and going back. Right.
Right.
But my understanding with, like, I've done a bunch with Swing Catalyst and I've done a bunch of stuff with Mike Adams and Scott Lynn and different guys. My understanding of how different people work has made me go, oh, well, hell, I mean, the right hip's got to turn, and some people need to straighten the leg more. Some people turn this more, whatever. So I think that's, but like what you're saying is we're all evolving all the time, but you know, your understanding of what everybody's got to do but everybody can get back there if you create some movement.
Yeah, that is one of the bigger myths, I think, in golf is that people can't make a backswing because of their flexibility or limitations of themselves. And I see it totally different than that. There is no one who can't make a PGA Tour-like backswing. It can be complicated for some. It can be easy for others, but everyone can do it. And that's what we teach people to do all the time at Golf Tech. If you go into a Golf Tech lesson and you want to make a backswing that looks like a tour player, your coach can do that. There is no exception to that rule.
So I guess to wrap it up here, what's the final advice for Brad then? Obviously, the one on the left is his current swing. That's where he's at right now. Yeah. What's the advice, or what's the mission for him to go work on?
Well, for him to keep the height of the shot in the air, we actually practice more of the follow through and how to actually extend his wrist more. Keep the club face more open through the ball and still have the club as he's moving through, keep it down. Don't raise it up over his head as much. And then that's into the follow through. But what that's really training him to do is not have that similar problem through the ball. Now the backswing parts, we're always just practicing, just turn yourself more with your pelvis. I actually tell him don't turn your shoulders very much, which is for another day. But you might notice where I've got the club head relative to my hands. Mainly he starts pulling his arms apart. He extends his lead wrist or starts cupping it and points the shaft across the target line like that. It opens the face up a lot. So I'm trying to get him to practice while he's at home right now. I can't go outside. Keep his elbows close together and have the club head itself always on the opposite side of the butt end of the club throughout the whole swing, so that he's just practicing never pulling his arms apart that way. So it's a little bit of backswing, but mainly the follow through and practicing his wrist is how we're navigating, hitting higher shots that don't pull draw as much.
Very good.
That might be for another day, Cordie.
It was good.
What's
stuff.
that?
That might be for another day, Cordie.
Maybe. T, what have you been up to with your players? What are they working on during the shutdown here, and what have you been doing with your guys during this time?
Well, I'm luckier than most. We're still, we're in areas where golf is an essential. You can play golf. Obviously, there's a ton of restrictions, which as they should be. But I'm still able to teach private lessons. But obviously, our coaching is different. Social distancing, and there's no hands on and taking all the precautions. But so I'm still working with my guys. I've got a young player from Mississippi State that I've taught forever coming in this afternoon, and Zach Zucker was in, and we'll see Lucas next week. So look, you also have to be a realist. They're professionals, right? And the gun's going to go off at some point, and they're going to have to play again. And they're not going to all just pick up a club on June 1st or whatever it is and be ready to play. So everybody's being creative. We're using some video and some, stuff like that through and FaceTime and different things at home, and then just working the best we can.
Sounds like a good plan. Well, thanks for hanging out, guys. Tony, where can people find you? Where should they learn more?
You know what? I'd say most people have a phone now, so just go to Instagram and the Dew Sweeper. You can find me on there, and there's all kinds of good information, and there's access if they want an online lesson or whatever. So go to the Dew Sweeper. Just look up Dew Sweepers Golf on the internet. Be easy, and send us a message, and we'll be happy to help you. And Nick, I appreciate you letting me come on. You guys do a hell of a job, and it's always informative for me to sit down and talk with you. I enjoy it as much as anything. So
no, it's just fun to hang out with you. We need to do it more.
Absolutely. Let's do it for sure. If Cordie will invite us places, we do it. But you know how he is.
What he's like, he's selfish. He cares about himself.
Oh, I know. I know. You guys,
what a way to end this. Thanks, guys. That's great. Let's sign off.
Thanks a bunch. Appreciate you guys.
See you guys.
See everyone.
See ya.